to David Mixter and let David introduce him.
Well, I think this is going to seamlessly continue with the sorts of materials that we've been just listening to. David Mixter, well, I said last night, he worked on the terminal classic materials at the site of Actuncan, at the courtesy of Professor Lisa LeCount, who invited him to participate in her research project, a wonderful opportunity. He is now really working on the earlier material at Actuncan, very much commensurate with the sorts of things that Kat Brown was talking about in her presentation, and also harmonic with the things that I think Travis Stanton was interested in as well. So the living landscape, I would suggest, is what all of these individuals are working on. I don't know about Freidel vision, but I think we're certainly working with Maya vision, and I'm very pleased and privileged to know all of their work and to hear it today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Let me just work on getting the slideshow up here for half a second. Okay, I guess it's not going to let me do it. Okay.
Double click it.
Double click it. And then this can go like this.
Perfect.
And I think they're seeing this, though, not what I want to see. Let's try.
It's not working.
Not the way
it was working earlier. Can I give me a second?
Yeah, here.
Don't worry about it. We got this. All right, we're going to stop sharing here. We're going to share again. All right, share screen. Let's try the full screen here.
Yeah, try project.
There you go.
Okay, perfect. That'll work. Okay. My notes. Hi, everyone. Thank you all. So first of all, I just wanted to thank Matt and Max for inviting me to present. I think that this presentation will as David said, transition nicely from the work that Kat was just sharing with you all. I also want to say thank you to David, and I have a little bit more to say about that in a minute. But for now, I wanted to start by finding the laser pointer. Okay, so the image that you're looking at here is from across the river, looking at the site, the PreClassic site of Actuncan, located in Belize, which Kat mentioned briefly. In fact, this promontory here is the Triadic Group at Actuncan, which is very evident on the landscape from very far distances, and is one of the points that the lines from Kat's E group crosses. We don't know what those shrines might look like on that point because they're deeply buried under 28 meters of later architecture, which is what I'm primarily going to be talking about today. So this is the site of Actuncan. That right there is the promontory where that's the Triadic Group. Our E group is located right here on this linear ridge. Okay. There we go. Just get this out of the way. Very briefly, want to give you some geography. The site we're primarily going to be talking about today is Actuncan, which is located here in western Belize. This doesn't have the modern geographic borders, but the Guatemala-Belize border runs just to the west of the site. About 2 kilometers to the west of the site. Actuncan is located on the Mopon River, just a little ways above its confluence with the McCall that form into the Belize River. It's located up on an alluvial terrace above the river, and likely was a really important location for canoe trade, as were all of the sites along the Mopon River and Belize River over the course of history. This is really critical to some of the arguments I'm going to make earlier, and my thoughts about why Actuncan became the location for a Triadic temple group in the late PreClassic period. So I came to work at WashU with David some 15 years ago or so now, not that long ago, 13 years ago, 12 years ago. Time passes. And with a background in Maya art history from Mary Miller and field training with Kat at early Chinatonic, I remember staring at profiles on E2, drawing profiles with Kat and talking about Freidel vision and trying to envision how David would see the site in the early days. And perhaps a bit more randomly, I had experience working with Marcello Canuto at an early historic house in Connecticut. And so if, I don't know if Marcello is on, but he will be tomorrow. If any of you want some amusing anecdotes, ask Marcello about digging stone houses in Connecticut. So I came to WashU planning to immerse myself in material symbol systems, working with David, and to set up a dissertation project at Waka. I don't know, I was interested in doing something about burials, maybe something about trade, who can remember anymore. Two things sort of were happening at that time that created a certain amount of kismet, I guess. One, David had only recently arrived at WashU and was still navigating a faculty that was a little more suspect of his approaches to archaeology. And so he came to me and said, David, you need methods. You need to think about how to do archaeology that uses scientific approaches. I know David has always argued that iconography is science, and I agree with him. However, that wasn't really what they meant. The other thing that happened was that this was 2009, and those were tough financial times, as I think many of you remember. And the future of the Waka project was not certain at the time. And so David didn't know if there would be a field season for me to complete that projects there. So he shipped me off to Belize to work with Lisa LeCount, who'd recently gotten an NSF archaeology grant for the work at Actuncan. So off I was back to Belize, and out went material symbol systems, and in came cow pastures and deflated bounds and soil chemistry and micro artifacts and all kinds of other forensics. Yet listening to David talk last night, reminded me how much influence he really has had on the work I've done, and how much he rubbed off not just on me, but on the Actuncan project in general, sort of by proxy. So for my dissertation, I took on the excavation of this building here, this terminal classic platform at Actuncan. This is sort of representative of a post or collapse era sort of revitalization at the site, as kings were sort of falling apart and disappearing from the historical record at Chinatonic and other places. And I argued that as those kings were sort of disappearing, the local community at Actuncan was reorganizing at one of the oldest centers in the local valley, because Actuncan is primarily a PreClassic site, around more hierarchical or perhaps collective elective leadership principles. I even argued that this building was a council house. And to me, the idea of collective leadership, which David, of course, spoke about extensively last night, seemed very congruous with social organizations described in the ethnography of the Maya. For example, the rotating leadership system of the Cargo in the highlands, and also even community demands that archaeologists develop rotational labor systems in many more traditional Maya areas. It also matches very well with the sort of diverse political systems described in the ethnohistories of Yucatan. So this brought me to a question. Where did this collective or elective form of leadership come from if it emerged at Actuncan in the Terminal Classic? I don't believe that they invented it out of whole cloth. I believe that there must be some kind of antecedent for the idea of collective leadership that was either remembered consciously or institutionally. One possibility is that it could be seen through sort of sub-royal community forms of organization. Or was there some deeper legacy of collective rule at Actuncan that was reemerging in the Classic period. Okay. At the same time that David was thinking through the likelihood of non-dynastic rule in the pre-classic world, and we were having conversations about this in his office. David is wonderful to listen to speak about his ideas of the day, and he finds wonderful ways to relate them to your work. Though you may not realize it until 2 or 3 days later, at the same time, he was sort of working on non-dynastic rulership in the pre-classic world. The Actuncan project was sifting through data from several years of pre-classic household excavations. These excavations were designed by Lisa to see how emerging rulers differentiated themselves from households during the pre-classic period. But the answer, as we sort of dug into these data, simply was they didn't. Rather, we had elite houses and commoner houses that were built simultaneously at the site in the late pre-classic period. And the site had no pre-classic palace at all. There's a palace structure there in the middle that you see, but it wasn't developed as such until the late classic period. So based on our interpretation, there's no clear evidence that a single lineage established dynastic control over Actuncan's kingdom at any time. Instead, our working hypothesis is that Actuncan's pre-classic rulers were selected in some way from the elite families, and then ritually transformed into rulers, as David has sort of delineated. In short, in this formulation, our data support David's contention, at least in the Actuncan case. Yet, this hypothesis about sort of early leadership at Actuncan is still based to some degree on the assumption that pre-classic geopolitics, more broadly, were like classic period geopolitics. For example, we don't actually know if pre-classic Actuncan was the seat of a ruler at all necessarily. Does the superstate model laid out by Martin and Grube, is it appropriate for understanding pre-classic politics? Can we assume there really was an Ahau or a Kulahau at each of these sites? This is where I think Friedel's idea of empire that he's published on recently helps us to sort of think through what pre-classic politics might have looked like. For those of you who are not familiar, David has sort of recently laid out in a lecture at the Peabody Museum, which you can go watch, or in his wonderful chapter from 2018, the idea that a part of the model is the idea that late pre-classic politics are based on the idea of El Mirador emerging as the seat of a rapidly spreading imperial entity of some kind. There's still a lot of space, though, to determine what that might actually look like. And to prove that idea at all in the first place with additional evidence. So the question I think becomes, and the one that we're hoping to set out to look at Actuncan in the next phase, is what might the material evidence for empire in some form look like from a frontier zone in the pre-classic period? And what do individual sites actually represent in some kind of larger pre-classic polity arrangement? So just to sort of start by looking at the pre-classic in general, James Doyle has done us a favor of producing this map in his book, where he lays out, which he did to sort of constrict the frame of his arguments to what the sort of central lowlands area. But he identifies a sort of central lowlands pre-classic tradition that has a certain set of architectural and artifactual components to it. The presence of E groups, the presence of triadic temple groups, the presence in a few sites of pre-classic figural stela, monumental stucco masks often associated with those triadic groups, Chicanel ceramics, though those go much beyond that zone as well. And, importantly, as David has pointed out, a lack of elite burials in that zone during the late pre-classic period. And so these are the standardized form of things that we see in this central lowland zone that's broadly kind of associated with El Mirador. For me, in my research, I think there's a lot to say about each of those components, but I'm going to focus today on triadic groups. Because to me, triadic groups actually are the hallmark of this spreading, in my hypothesis, the hallmark of the spreading influence from El Mirador. Triadic groups are generally defined, self-descriptive. They're groups anchored around three primary pyramids that form a U and form a plaza in between. We often see them nested in this way, like this example from the El Tigre complex and also at Actuncan, where you have the central structure of the primary U is actually a platform that has another sort of triadic group sitting on top of it. They're often adorned by painted stucco masks. And, while there is quite some variability over time and space, there's some standardization to this structure. Perhaps most importantly to this argument, however, they are not universal. And that is a key in the pre-classic. Rather, I think the lack of universality, indicates that they are a key marker of this kind of cultural phenomenon that is emanating from Mirador, where we do see them, for example, there are quite a few at El Mirador and in the sites around the central karstic uplands. And they tend to spread, as Kathy Reeds-Taylor and Deborah Waka have pointed out, they spread along trade routes along the New River towards Cerros, past Lamanai. Mary Jane Acuna has talked about these in the context of frontiers, and talked about the triadic group at El Achatal for her dissertation, where she sees an interesting, in the artistic corpus, sort of combination of Maya and Olmec imagery. They seem to spread towards Yaxuna and to the north, and Mary Jane also talks about the sort of pattern of this sort of frontier pattern of mixed cultural influences up along the coast of Yucatan as well. And they spread towards Actuncan, down from the southeast of the Mirador zone towards the Belize River Valley. Notably, they don't go any further. To my knowledge, there are no triadic groups further downriver on the Belize River Valley in the late pre-classic period. So, catching up on my notes. Okay, so, Doyle also talks about this kind of like coastal Belize zone. And one of the things that's really interesting is that sites in the pre-classic and in the late pre-classic in Belize just don't look the same as those in the central area for several reasons. In the north, there are sites like Kashob and Quail that have tons of burials, and including at Kashob, where there's a big major foundational burial. I think that's sort of interesting in relationship to the arguments about the trade routes at Cerros, because the trade route kind of skips those sites, which are also along the New River to a certain degree, reflecting perhaps kind of well, I'll come to that in a minute. And then also in the Belize River Valley pre-classic period, we see that further downriver, you don't have the establishment of triadic groups. And in fact, at about the same time that the triadic group is established at Actuncan, which is probably 3rd century BC, you see around Jaime Awe and Claire Ebert have sort of hypothesized that between 150 and 300 BC, you see the transition of the E groups there to into the Eastern Triadic shrines that become more ubiquitous along that part of the river. So why do we see these kinds of signatures expanding, in particular triadic groups? And what does geopolitics look like? Are we seeing evidence of kind of royal emulation? The local communities adopting this form of rulership that's being established in the Mirador zone? Are we seeing an empire asserting direct rule over communities? Are we seeing some kind of form of colonization where sites like Cerros, Achotal, Actuncan are being placed strategically along trade routes in order to control access to goods and materials? And related to this, why does this phenomenon halt in the Belize River Valley? Why do we see the establishment of Actuncan but nothing further along? Okay. This image here is 2 different images. The one on top is the E group at San Bartolo, a reconstruction of it, and the bottom one is a reconstruction of one of the triadic groups at Mirador, just intended to stand in as a generic triadic group in this case. I wanted to just briefly mention the triadic group at San Bartolo in this context, because in a 2018 article, Bill Saturno and colleagues established that the triadic that E group is replaced by a triadic group. And it's the only example I know of a direct replacement, and I think they assert that as well. But to me, that is really a key moment, example of seeing the way that the ideology of triadic groups is being used as a object of power, as a symbol of the assertion of a different kind of ideology. Perhaps San Bartolo was recalcitrant and needed a more aggressive form of assertion. It's hard to know, but we see that I think this replacement in the central Belize zone of movement from focusing on E groups to focusing on triadic groups has a historical trajectory. So here's a map of Actuncan, and you can see it. Here's the big triadic group at the south in Actuncan South. The site has both north-south and east-west primary axes. It has a large Washaktun style E group up at the north, which dates back to 1000 BC, has its foundation before 1000 BC. Otherwise, it's got and so those are the major components that are to focus on at the moment. Actuncan is situated in the Mopon River Valley, which was over time a very dynamic political landscape. And this is important in the context of Kat's recent talk that just preceded. Before Actuncan was established as a major center, early Chinatonic was likely the primary capital in the region. And around 200 BC, when Kat suggests early Chinatonic was abandoned, was about the same time that we see an explosion of construction at Actuncan. In fact, at that time, most of Actuncan's monumental architecture is begun seemingly all at once, around 200 BC. And we see the transformation of the site, the burial of an early village, entirely by the site, and the reconstruction under a different common axis. to me, this sudden reconstruction, which may include the foundation of the Triadic Group, is representative of the sudden imposition of a new ruling order. We see this also as evident in the transformation of the primary axis of the site, which shifts from 17.5 degrees west of north to 7 degrees west of north. And in fact, that's key because actually the E group is the only part of the site that is retained in this transformation. Everything else is created new. Right, and as I said, this replaces early Chinatonic. Okay, so the Triadic Group at Actuncan, which is what I'm going to talk about for most of the rest of the talk, is a nested Triadic Group. It sits on an 82 meter by 120 meter platform that's 4 meters high. The primary pyramid, which is made up of structure 4, the platform, and structure 1 up on the top, raises 27 meters above the plaza level below. So it's pretty substantial. And the two main flanking pyramids, 5 and 6, are both about 8 meters high. The site's been heavily looted, mostly in the 70s and 80s, though there was additional looting done in 2015. Including structure 5 has been totally gutted, like below plaza level. The entire core of the building's been dug out. But these looter's trenches give us a really nice window into the construction histories of these buildings. As we've sort of expanded research into the Triadic Group, we've taken data from a few different sources. Along with Tom Jameson, I've been working through archival research of notes from James McGovern's work during the the Chinatonic Archaeological Project in the 1990s. We went to Richard Leventhal's archives and scanned everything. Need to send students back to scan even more, actually, which include never published drawings and important information that really provides us with a good jump start on the site. We've also been doing new recording of the looter's trenches and preliminary excavations begun in 2013, which focused on small terminal classic platforms and now structure 4. Okay. So yeah, James McGovern, he was primarily interested in volumetric analysis for his dissertation. He documented existing looter's trenches and collected ceramics from the walls. And he targeted he undertook targeted excavations mostly to focus on getting volumetric data. And while many of his profiles made it into the dissertation, he made beautiful field drawings, and the drawings that he published lack a lot of the wonderful detail. So besides the volumetric analysis, he made two key findings. One is that he found Actuncan stila 1, which is a late pre-classic monument, which is dated only stylistically, not contextually. And this monument is what Actuncan is really most known for. Actuncan stila 1 was originally drawn and analyzed by McGovern with Nikolai Grube. However, at the time in 1994, the corpus of comparable art was quite different than it is now. Now, the style is clearly seen as within our understanding of late pre-classic art, though given the level of erosion, some aspects of it are difficult to interpret with certainty. What you see is clearly an individual standing among plants. There's some kind of scroll work emerging behind the individual, and he seems to be holding a staff of some kind, perhaps a bloodletter, like those seen on the walls of the San Bartolo mural, or a blowgun. This monument is really key because it positions Actuncan not just in the architectural pattern of the Central Lowlands, but also in association with the emerging artistic corpus of early royal legitimization. Second, within the looters trenches at Actuncan that are now filled in, or this looters trench that is now filled in, this is from the northeast looters trench here, McGovern found identified intact monumental polychrome stucco masks flanking the third oldest version of the structure. This mask was between two staircases, indicating that in this phase, the structure had a central staircase and two flanking staircases, with the mask between the central and eastern stair. I love this beautiful drawing. Sometimes it's nice to share the sort of original field drawings. And so here is that, and we only have these because I went and dug through the archive and scanned 1 million slides. So here it is. This is this the section that's been recorded, that was exposed and has been recorded, is 1.7 meters tall, but it's only a portion of the sculpture. You can see what we're looking at is the right ear flare with some kind of snout protruding forward, but with this limited exposure, it's a little bit difficult to say what's represented, though I look forward to talking about it with David some more. We also know that there are masks on structure 5, though McGovern never saw them. He just saw them in profile when they've been cut, where they've been cut through by the looters. McGovern also documented the massive looters trenches in 5 and 6, which I sort of briefly mentioned, that really gutted those buildings. And I'm not going to talk about those anymore. We know that those buildings are largely late pre-classic, with one classic period construction phase apiece. Additionally, the final summit building, structure 1, appears to be late classic, but the next version below it is late pre-classic. And the final version of structure 4, the big platform, appears to be probably early classic, right before the site is eclipsed by Buena Vista Del Cayo to the north. There's also was a massive terminal classic ritual deposit on the summit of structure 4. Yeah, and in my dissertation, which I'm not going to talk about more, 7, 8, and 9 were shown to be terminal classic, about focused on sort of a later reutilization and grafting onto the importance of this complex. What I am going to talk about a little bit more is structure 4, and you can see this is the entrance to this giant looters tunnel at the center of structure 4. And this is where we have the earliest evidence of construction at this site. This is what the looters tunnel looked like in the 90s. It was 11 meters long at the time, and showed us 5 versions of this site with the mask associated with that third version, the staircase 3 here. This is what the tunnel looks like now. The fill is made of compact plaster and Suscob construction fill, and this extension of the looters tunnel happened in 2015. 11 major construction phases are now evident, and likely at least 4 major sort of different configurations. The latest version being associated with these sort of external 2 staircases. The next version, these staircases 3, 4, and 5, which is likely that the version with 3 primary staircases that's associated with the masks. Then there's this major expansion to get to that staircase 5. And there are these earlier versions that are probably quite a bit smaller platforms, of which staircases 6 through 9, are all totally burned, gray, the entire staircases. And then there's this earliest structure 11, which is only represented by a floor surface in our recording, but is almost certainly a platform. I hope to have I'd hoped to have some radiocarbon dates for you on these, but they're still in process. We also excavated down in front of the staircase outside in order to try and confirm McGovern's plaza sequence and collect ceramics for relative dating, which we're going to look at this coming summer. We identified the terminal staircase there in those excavations. But there's still a long, and we got about 2.5 meters down, but it seems like there's still a long way to go to the bottom. And we know that because if we take these two profiles and put them together, you can see the floors that we found and the ones that McGovern has found are clearly only associated with staircases 1 through 5 at the most. We have no idea where the plaza surface is related to these earlier internal buildings. But sort of learning more about these buildings is really key, I think, to understanding the introduction of late pre-classic and Mirador related ideology into the region. So now we have to go find the funding to do this work. So yeah, ongoing work. We're working right now on sort of chronological refinement. We've fortunately, because those surfaces were burned of those staircases, we've got some in situ carbon to date. So we should have some dates by the summer. I'm going to go and do ceramic analysis with Bobby Samova this summer in order to try and look at some of the relative dating. We're also collaborating. I'm collaborating with Bobby, who's doing her dissertation on the E group, to try and think about this transition from the E group to the Triadic as the dominant ritual center at the site, and what that might tell us both chronologically and in terms of sort of community organization and power. So what does this all tell us? We only have hints at what this might mean for late pre-classic geopolitics. I think it's interesting to try and think about whether how do we think about sort of frontiers in this time? One way that we might expect to see frontiers in the Acuna model is having sort of hybrid material culture indicators. But I think we're starting to, what we really are seeing is a more wholesale kind of imposition of cultural markers at Actuncan, based on the sort of rapid construction of the site, the burial of what kind of came before, and the sort of departure and abandonment of early Chinatonic at the same time. And the huge investment in construction that this monumental building sort of made. So here I am, back where it all started, tracing material symbol systems across space and time again. I'm hopeful that in the near future, we'll be able to expose some of those masks and some of the buried architecture under this building. Thanks to you all.
Come sit with me.
Sounds good, yeah.
All right, so we won't have time to take many questions,
okay.
but I just wanted to give David the opportunity to say thanks.
Thank you very much, David Mixter, for this intriguing application of the idea of empire to Actuncan and to the frontiers. I think it's very promising, and I really look forward to future seeing more of the material symbol system inside your Triadic group. But I think it's a wonderful project to continue to test this proposition that there is such a cultural heartland, if you will, in the Maya lowlands. And I think it's promising. I point out that there are masks as far north as the far north part of Yucatan presently, as you observed. And so our notion of what the parameters might be on such a political entity, if it ever existed, are still pretty fluid. We're still working on it. But thank you. That was really wonderful. I appreciate it.
Thank you, David.